We started with cover crops probably, I'm trying to remember, 2004, 2005, in that time frame. We really didn't know what we were doing. We started with some single species cover crops. So, you know, over the years, I guess what I figured out, or what we try to do is what are we trying to do? What, have a goal of what we're trying to do with the cover crop. And so that can be site specific to each individual field, or just as simple as I want to stop wind and water erosion. And so in the sandy soils here around Bentley, that's a big deal for us. We seem to get bigger rains less frequently. And so we want to capture as much water as we can when we do get those rain events. And of course, with the resistant weeds that are getting worse every year, the cover crops became a much bigger part of our weed control program. The building soil health and increasing water for water infiltration, nutrient retention, all those things kind of snowball into it. So you may only have one set goal, but many things are happening in the background that it's hard to exactly monitor, but you can see them happening over time, which is really fun. So to me, cover crops are a lot of fun. They're different, and it's a pretty integral part of our operation. So just for example, this year we farmed just right around 4,000 acres, and of that 2,400 acres of that will be planted back to cover crops this fall. So we do a lot of acres of cover crops, and they fit into our rotations in different places. Yeah, so we have a lot of different goals, but the weed control is a major issue, especially in front of soybeans. Corn, not quite as much. There's pretty good weed control options in corn, but soybeans, you can spend a lot of money trying to control weeds into soybeans. So the cover crops, the grasses, rye in particular, it's low-hanging fruit, cheap and easy, has worked very well for us. Last year, for example, we did not post apply 1 acre of soybeans. We did a burn down with a pre-emerge, and we were done on our soybeans. So that was a huge cost savings to not be putting Extend or Ingenia and making those extra trips across the field. This year, the cover crop wasn't quite as big and healthy. We did have to do some post applying this year, so it's not a magical silver bullet that works every year, but even when you do have weeds come through the soybeans, it's not near the numbers that you would have, and even straight no-till with a fair amount of residue. There's a major reduction in that fact. So I guess some of the real common questions I get, what do the issue of a lot of people say, well, I like the idea of cover crops, but I just don't have time, or I don't have the equipment. But most people have the equipment. It doesn't take anything special. If you got a drill, you can do cover crops that can plant no-till. To us in the beginning, we didn't really know what we were doing, but as we got into year 2 and 3 and 4, we saw how important it was to what we were trying to do. We actually hired part-time help in the fall to drive trucks to where we had an extra person to run the air drill right behind the combine. So it became such a big deal to us that we made sure we had enough labor to run that air drill in the fall. So that was something that we addressed once we started doing a lot more acres. The other thing I get a lot of questions about is, well, what do you do with landlords? Especially with older landlords, it takes some education to explain to them what you're doing and why you're doing it. Depending on if you're on crop share or cash rent and what you're sharing, what you're not sharing, those kind of things. Cover crops can be a real benefit to them. Yield increases and less weeds, better yields, and So I haven't found that to be a real big issue as long as you have good communication with your landlords on a relationship built with trust, and you explain to them why you're doing it, how you're doing it, and what it's going to benefit them. Um, we we really haven't had any problems there. The next question a lot of people ask, well, what about the cost of the cover crops? We do not share that with the landlord. We do not charge them for anything for the cover crop. Um, we feel that we get enough benefit to it from it ourselves and our side of the operation that it's just an added benefit that we like to provide to our landowners. So we do lots of different cover crops. Just for an example, if I can find my notes, we're working on this fall's mix just the other day, and we're probably looking at, this would be something, for example, where our fall mix would fit would be after our dryland corn and irrigated corn come off. We would plant that cover crop immediately after the corn comes off, goes through the winter. We have some opportunity to graze that if we get good growth. So we will graze that with some of our own feeder cattle that we bring in. We also bring in other people's cow-calf pairs and do custom grazing when we have enough acres, which this year we should have plenty if everything grows correctly. So, but just for an example, that mix will be rye, black oats, flax, rapeseed, and radish, and winter peas. And so that fits into that early September through about October 15th timeframe. And so, the grasses obviously are for weed control and weed suppression going into next spring, keeping the ground covered. Those things, the flax is in there for nematode suppression. So some of our sandier soils, we've actually got some pretty high level of nematodes on our irrigated circles. And so we've seen a pretty good reduction in our nematode numbers by using flax, radishes, rapeseed, those kind of go to stimulating the mycorrhiza in the soil. So each thing has its own little component, and we put those together. The winter peas would obviously, hopefully, over time, provide a little nitrogen into the spring. So I got, there's a few questions coming here. We'll do that so I don't have to sit here and just keep rambling. I like questions better. What covers do you like to plant prior to planting beans? So yeah, our biggest one that we do is some kind of rye blend. I know a lot of people don't like that because of, we're in wheat country. But rye is an amazing cover crop. It's cheap. The amount of root mass it puts down compared to oats, triticale, barley, it's just better. Those other ones work great in a cover crop. One thing I would suggest, if you have wheat in your rotation, do not use wheat as a cover crop. Wheat's lazy. It takes fertilizer to make it grow. Rye will go scavenge anything that you have left and make a massive root system. Those other ones work well. We've done those also. But there seems to be a lot better allopathic effect to pigweeds from the rye than you'll get from triticale, oats, and barley, and those kinds of things. So we do a lot of rye, and we'll have some kind of blend in that early part of the fall. We get past October 20th, you're running out of heat units to benefit on like the flax and rapeseed, and the winter peas. We'll just go back to more a straight oats and rye mix later into the winter. And we keep going. We don't quit. Last year we quit on Christmas Eve drilling, so we finally threw in the towel. But we've done it when the ground's frosted a little bit, so we usually don't stop if the weather's not allow us to get it done. And so we have cotton in our rotation, so the cotton comes off much later. Time we get the bales out of there, we're usually planting the cover on that much later. But since cotton doesn't have much residue at all when it's done, it's really important to us to get a cover crop in there no matter how late it is. Another question was, did you see the benefits immediately or was it gradual? Things like the water holding capacity, the organic matter increases, those are very slow. It bugs me how slow it is. The water holding capacity we have up really pretty good shape. We actually had a group out here last week, and they did the ring test, whatever it's called, that does the infiltration. And he did 2 of them. He did one which would have been a more high traffic area where we had grazed cattle, but it would be more in kind of the trail where the cattle were going back and forth to the water all last winter. We do kind of lazy man rotational grazing. We move them every couple of weeks, but that was like 6.5 inches per hour. But when we got out into the corn, kind of in a less high traffic area, we were over 8 inches an hour. What the infiltration weight. We didn't do the second go of it to see what the second rate was, but so our infiltration's done really well. So those things have developed over time. The real immediate thing for us was yield, and weed control was a big deal. We started doing side-by-side testing, splitting fields, doing, half the field with, half the field without, doing replicated strips. We did that for about 7 years, and we had enough data that we just said, well, I'm tired of having the strips that are just no-till because we're losing yield every time. So with, you do it for 7 years. We had dry years, we had wet years, we had years in the middle. When you averaged them all together, we pretty much were always ahead. So 2011, I thought would be the year that the covers were really going to hurt us. When we got all said and done on the irrigated, it was, you were talking a 20 bushel increase on irrigated soybeans where we had covers because we were able to control that evaporation. We got pretty close to making average yields on soybeans in 11. Of course, the dryland were terrible, but there wasn't a huge difference where we had covers and where we didn't. 2012, for example, of course, it was still fairly dry, so we had some just straight no-till into failed corn, dryland corn from 11, which was very low residue. Those are the only soybeans we didn't cut that year. The stuff that had cover crops, we had beans to cut, but the straight no-till stuff on a lower residue situation, we didn't even have to cut them. So some things like that are instantaneous. Of course, the weed control, as you know, what these chemicals cost. Anytime I'd much spend money on seed than I would chemical. So not that we don't chemicals, we just try to eliminate as much of it as we can. We still spend way too much, just like everyone else. But another question is, do we graze the cover crops, and what kind of gains do you get on stalkers? The gains vary a lot. But yeah, so like the mix I was just describing with the rye and the oats and the flax and rapeseed, typically we're trying to plant that in that early September timeframe. And then we will turn them out. Typically, we're kind of lazy. We usually wait till after Thanksgiving so we don't have to deal with stalkers getting out of the fence. So we wait till after Thanksgiving's over, usually the day after Thanksgiving or the Monday after Thanksgiving, whatever the weekend that is. And so we'll run them out there, usually approximately 90 days, depending on how much growth we had and how many consecutive fields we have. We try to put them in blocks to where we can move the cattle without having to load them up and move them a long distance. I don't have the numbers in front of me. I do have some slides put together on that, but I'd say pretty easily we're usually always 3 pounds or better. We've been in the mid 4s on gain on the cover crops, and those are planted in corn stalks. So you got leftover corn residue, and then the cover crop. I'm trying to remember which year it was. We were down all the way. We were only at 2 pounds of gain a day. And I don't remember, I think that was a real wet fall, and they just weren't performing like they would. But, if the weather's not terrible, it's pretty easy for us to be 3+ and we've been up into 4.5 range before. And we buy a lot of local calves from cow-calf guys here and try to buy local. Next question is, what % of your corn is planted into cover crop, and how does that compare to beans? Does irrigated acres change if you use covers? The % of our corn that's planted into cover crop really varies year to year. I'd say we're not near as aggressive on the corn, corn into cover crop. A lot of times, let's say, for example, we did wheat double crop bean or wheat double crop milo. There's not a lot of time to plant a cover crop in there, and a lot of times we will follow that rotation with corn. So there's not a real big window to get that in there, because if it's coming off in November and you're going to plant in early April, you know, there's not a lot of time to get a lot of benefit from a cover crop. If we're doing corn on corn, a lot of our irrigated circles, we'll stack 2 years of corn. We'll put a cover crop in between those. So on a percentage, I'd say maybe 35–40% of our corn gets planted in the cover crop, and the rest would be straight no-till, following. But all of it's into, you know, some kind of high residue situation, whether it's wheat double crop beans or wheat double crop milo. A lot of those go in there.
Who is it?
How's that compare to beans?
Who? Ryan? You can't see me.
I can hear you. About 100% of our beans goes into covers. We don't plant any soybeans that doesn't go into a cover crop. So the irrigated, does the irrigated acres change if you use covers? I guess I'm not sure exactly what you mean by that, but I mean, we treat the irrigated and the dryland acres the same as far as using cover crops. I'm probably a little more aggressive on how big I let something get on irrigated than I would be dryland. If we start getting dry, I'm a little more nervous about the dryland of when we decide to terminate. I always want a bunch of residue, but if the weather's starting to get into a drier pattern, you know, we don't want to pull everything out. So it just really depends, weather dependent, on how big the cover crop you let the cover crop get. When you terminate, we try to plant some soybeans green, as many as possible. The early beans we plant, we'll plant them green into the rye. The later season dryland beans that we would be planting later May into maybe first week of June, I mean, we have to kill the cover crop before that. So we kind of have a mixed bag on whether we plant green or we plant into cover crop that we've killed. Another question was, do you use a roller to terminate? We did a long time ago. We thought we wanted to do that. We had a 20-foot roller way back when, and it works well when you have a really tall uniform cover crops, like a single species rye that's really tall. It'll roll down and kill it really nice. Sun hemp, when you're talking about summer cover crops. But when you start going into a mix, multi-species, they're not all the same height. Some of them will just roll over and come right back. So it's kind of a mixed bag on how successful you are. One year, the rye was very drought stressed. When we tried to roll it, maybe half of it, we ended up having to spray it anyway. And then, of course, we started increasing our acres, and you start trying to do, you know, 1,800 acres of cover crop with a 20-foot roller. That doesn't work out very well. So we kind of went away from the roller. I'm not opposed to it at all. It does have some limitations, but when it works, it's a neat tool. It's really nice to plant into. If money was not an issue, which in this climate that it's not going to happen, but they do make rollers that you can mount on your planter that actually roll the cover crop as the planter, you know, rolls the cover crop and you planting right into it. It's all attached to your planter. I would really like to do that someday when we change planters, to have that set up on the planter to where we roll and plant all in one pass. Okay, any other questions on that part of it? Don't see any. But yeah, you know, I guess if you haven't messed with it or you're thinking about it, there, you know, there's a lot of resources. There's cover crop, and I can't think of the name of it. There's a handbook that basically has every cover crop you could dream of and its benefits and its planting timing, and some of that stuff's really good to read and learn about, you know, kind of figure out what your goals are, what you want to try to do, and then figure out which cover crops fit into that. And, you know, when we started way back when, there wasn't a lot of great information. We kind of just did trial and error and did some dumb things that worked and did some dumb things that weren't real great. And, you know, we was like, well, we like this, we don't like this, let's dump this, let's change the seeding rate. You know, we just kind of started small and having some success with it and changed our program and it just adjusted along the way. You know, it does add cost. You know, you got to trip across the field with a drill and, you know, I try to keep the seed costs as low as possible. You know, I'd prefer $15 to $18. I don't want to spend a whole lot more than that. So, you know, I want the cover crop to work for me, but you know, when you start talking some of the summer mixes, I know guys, you know, you can get up to $35 to $50 an acre, and that, I mean, that's just not going to work. It really needs to be an economical number on the seed. But there's a lot of them out there that are pretty economical. Just depend on what you want to do. As far as planting into it, we just have a standard case planter. There's nothing special about it. You know, we use an air drill, single disc air drill, plant right into it. It doesn't have any special attachments. Or as far as the timing, there's a lot of flexibility on planting timing. Like I said earlier, our soils are sandy loams, so we do have the ability to, you know, it's a little more forgiving when it gets super wet. You know, if you have a huge cover crop and it gets super wet, yeah, the Sarah book. Thank you, Jared. But yeah, if you get super wet on a clay soil, it's probably going to be a little harder to get that dried out. But you know, on those spring cover crops, there's a lot of things that's doing for you. So let's just say we're getting our normal, fairly good spring rains. You're actually using that moisture to grow that cover. And yeah, you're drying that soil out, but at the same time, when we get that 5-inch rain, it has somewhere to go besides the ditch and then into the Arkansas River, and taking a lot of soil with it. You know, I know every area is different, but we have ground in Harvey County too, and there's, you know, the amount of erosion is pretty frightening that you can see in the spring when we get our spring rains. So, you know, that's just one thing we're trying to avoid as much as we can. Capture as much water as we can in those time periods. You know, grow something with that excess moisture. And then, you know, if it gets hot in the middle of summer, then we have that you know, thick mat of residue to control the evaporation. And that, I think that's where a lot of bang for the buck from the cover crop comes from, beyond the weed control. Is the evaporation control in the summer, just keeping that ground completely covered to where you really don't, the sun doesn't have any chance to get to it. When we go back to, if you want to get into soil health aspects, we have, we've seen some things that we really can't say or quantify yet. I do know on our cotton, you know, in 2018 we had a really nice cotton crop. It was corn, cover crop, grazed with cattle, and then let the rye, the cover crop, grow back up, and we no-tilled cotton into that. We had really nice cotton yields, but the interesting part was compared to other farmers that we talk to and compare hybrids and quality and stuff. We had some of the highest quality cotton that went through the gin in 2018. It might have been a fluke. I don't know if you can really tie it to soil health. They're starting to do some studies on that. Levi's actually making, they have a program for cotton that is grown in, I don't know what you want to call it, sustainable soil health, whatever you want to call it, that they're actually promoting that into a certain, I don't know what the name of the gene is, but it's a special gene. I'm sure they're charging way more for it. But it was kind of interesting to see that our quality was much higher. We're kind of planning our starting to see if we can figure out to do some nutrient testing on some of our grains. I really don't know if there's anything to that, where we've been in this system for pretty close to 15 years now. Not to the level we're doing it now, but over time we've increased what we've done. I don't know if there's ever going to be a market or a value. I'm hoping at some point someday that maybe our grains may be a little higher quality on the nutrient side, that might actually be able to where we could differentiate it and sell it at a premium. Right now, there's nowhere to do that. But there's starting to be some studies done on that, and it'll be interesting to see where that goes in the future. But the cotton was pretty glaring when we got that back. For those of you who don't know, the cotton is graded a whole bunch of dimensions and strength and color and how much foreign materials in it. And so, and then they always tell you what the gin average is. And we've been beating the gin average by quite a bit every year. So we get a premium on our cotton. So we don't really have any way of putting those things together if that's the cause, but it's kind of interesting to see that we're picking up a premium on our cotton. But I really can't substantiate that's why, but I think that's why, but it's kind of interesting, but we don't really have any way to prove it. Another question is, do you use many legumes, and how much do you put in the mix? So in the winter mix, we'll put some winter peas in there, but that's about there's not a lot of legumes that'll go through that fall into the winter and actually make it through the winter. If you let it go till April or whatever, that you can actually get any good out. Winter peas are pretty decent. But when you go to a summer mix, like if, let's say you cut your wheat, excuse me, you cut your wheat and you're going to plant a summer mix, that's when you can get pretty aggressive with legumes and try to grow your own nitrogen. So we've done that quite a bit. Just kind of depends. Some years we might be a little heavier on double cropping. Some years, if it's wet and the conditions aren't great to double crop, then that's when we'll do a summer cover crop. Or if there's a field that has a certain need, we're having issues, then we'll see if we can fix it with some summer cover crops. But yeah, summer mix, you can do sun hemp, cowpeas. I mean, the list goes on and on. It's pretty easy if you get some good rains to grow 100 plus bushel or 100 pounds of nitrogen for that next crop. You kind of have to watch what your seed in ratio of your mix will be, on how fast that's released back. Let's say if you're planting corn that year, you're still going to need nitrogen to get that corn crop started, because the mineralization of those residues takes a while. So the higher your seed in ratio is, the longer it takes to break down, the more nitrogen you need up front. If you've been in a system where you've been doing that for a while, your nitrogen cycle is probably fairly active, your mineralization, and you may not have that lag. In the first couple of years, there could be an issue there. You got to think through where your nitrogen, how much your nitrogen you're putting on, and the timing, if you're counting on your cover crop to provide nitrogen. But it will do an amazing job. One example of that was we had sun hemp we did a block of sun hemp on an 80-acre field. I think it was a 15 or 20-acre block. It was kind of out in the middle. We had some other cover crops, but it was a straight sun hemp at that time. And I think we had Gary Kramer from Sedgwick County Extension. He did the biomass study on how much nitrogen was produced out of that. We had a really nice wet summer. So it actually had produced 120 pounds of nitrogen. And so we need to, so it was really interesting to see how much nitrogen was produced, and then we could, the next crop, we basically didn't need any nitrogen but starter. Okay, looks like we're ready to move on.
Thank you, Ryan, for that. Our next speaker tonight will be Jamie Lynn Farney. She's the Southeast Area Beef Specialist, and she's been doing a lot of research on covers and grazing covers of livestock, and she's got a lot of good information for us to talk about in that tonight. So I'll let Jamie Lynn take it away.
Hello, Ryan, and everybody. I'm sure glad to be here. I'm so sorry my phone is being, or my computer's being just a little bit wonky. I can't hear anybody anymore. Well, as Ryan had said, I am Jamie Lynn Farney, and I am a beef specialist. So I was tasked with today's talking about different cover crops for cattle. Now I am going to go ahead and share a screen because I can just go to rambling like crazy. Can you guys see a slideshow presentation? Ryan, I can see you. Can you shake your head if you can see it?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. So as I've kind of titled, this is just kind of a discussion with cattle and annual forages. So, you've kind of already mentioned some things, but what I really like about integrating cattle within our cropping systems, I can't say it better than Alan and others did in a journal publication in 2007, that integration of cattle within cropping systems encourages sustainable farming and generates positive interactions between crops and livestock with both environmental and economic benefits. I don't think anybody who is in the agricultural industry would have an issue with that statement. That's why we're in the business. Now, what are some of those specific benefits? One of the first ones that I really kind of talk most about is you reduce your risk of raising a single product. Oftentimes, and we just were dealing with that kind of here in Southeast Kansas not too long ago. We were in a drought in Southeast Kansas. Our corn did not look like it was going to make. And so we were, people who had cattle were already making their plans for how to utilize their corn or their drought-stressed corn for their livestock. Also, when you have this integrated crop and livestock system, what typically happens when the margins for your grain production are really high and you have cattle? The cattle guys aren't making that much money. And vice versa. When the cattle guys make the most money, it's when corn's cheap. So it allows you to kind of balance out both of those cost perspectives. Ryan's already been talking about the water infiltration component and soil erosion. And both of those, we kind of wanted to, in the animal side, say, oh, it's because of the animals. Well, it's probably more from the fact that you have something growing because you can't graze cattle on dirt. They need something to eat. And the process of actually having a growing plant out there helps reduce soil erosion, increase water filtration. I'm a ruminant nutritionist, so I cannot go a day without talking or looking at or something about cattle manure. Fecal matter is something that we just are constantly, worried about from a ruminant nutrition perspective. Now, one of the things we really do like about this integrated crop and livestock system is it allows you to be able to recycle or have within farm nutrient cycling. And there is quite a bit of research across, several different universities that find that the quickest way to increase organic matter in your operation is through some kind of fecal material of cattle. Now, all we have to do is just teach our cattle to urinate and defecate on every square inch of your crop field. And then, well, if I could figure that out, I might not be only working for a state salary. Now, I haven't found the magic bullet, though. There are some issues with incorporating cattle into our grazing crop systems. The very first one I always get questions about is compaction. And you see, I've got a couple of question marks on that. I think that's more an old coffee shop, wives' tale, whatever you want to say it. We do see some compaction measurements, but when you read all the literature, that compaction maybe occurs in that top 2.54 millimeters or 2.54 centimeters, essentially an inch. Kansas, we have freeze-thaw cycles that breaks up that, and very rarely, unless you get into just a 5-inch rain and your cattle were out there and just, tore it up to hock deep, that's really more of when we see some compaction. So I'm not near as worried about compaction as I was when I started investigating this research back in 7 years ago. Water. We actually did a survey of Kansas producers and asked, why don't you utilize your crop ground for cattle production? We specifically were kind of asking about corn stalks, milo stalks, etc. And the number one reason is the water. When we converted all of our ground to crop production and moved away from, more of a multi-agricultural commodities to more of a single commodity, you're either a farmer or you're a rancher or something like that, we tore out all our fences, got rid of all of our watering systems. There in central Kansas where you guys are at, that's where my cattle with my in-laws are located, around the Sterling area. They don't really have a problem hauling water, but you visit with the rest of the state and there's a lot of people who will not graze because there is not a permanent water source there. Fencing, that's always something you have to worry about. Building it, putting it up, making sure the deer don't knock it down, etc. And one that I really have spent quite a bit of time kind of investigating has been some of the toxicities, or maybe some less of the toxicities associated with these annual forages. I actually have a publication where I took all 50 of the potential cover crops that NRCS lists as an option and investigated, will they kill cattle? And, have it's called it's MF 3244, potentially toxic forage crops. And you can see which ones potentially could kill your cattle. Now that's quite a bit of an introduction to really kind of get into a little bit more of why we integrate cattle in our crops. And, one of the big things is gains. You can just have quite a bit of gain. Now there's a lot of numbers in here, but one of the things that I really thought was cool off of this study, and several other studies have found the exact same thing. This was a multi-year project done out in Georgia, and they either had a winter cover crop they grazed, which was rye, or a summer cover crop, which was pearl millet. And these were kind of the calf gains. They had pairs out there. Well, one of the first things you see, your pairs were actually gaining weight. The lactating cow was gaining weight, which is usually uncommon to see in our lactating cows with most of our current management systems. Now, what I thought was even more interesting is here on this tillage, they either had conventional till or no till. And when you really look at it, especially the stuff that are green and with an asterisk, cattle on no-till ground had higher gains or gained better than those on conventional till. Now, I sat there and I was like, why would that be that way? Well, I originally thought maybe it's all that extra residue out there, you know, the dry residue from previous crops, etc. Well, it actually has to do with the soil structure. That no-till ground just has so much more solid structure. Every time a cow or calf has to physically move and put more effort into walking, that's not going towards muscle, milk, fat. So, you know, you think about it, people who really want to lose a lot of weight, go running on the beach, go running in the sandy area. That's kind of our comparison. Cattle are you're either running on the highway or you're running on sand. If you want to lose more weight, you run on the sand. The other thing that I really was interested in looking at these annual forages from a cattle perspective is one of the quickest ways, if you look in that last column, to recoup the cost of your cover crop, especially. You know, long term, you can get some of your nitrogen effects, possibly your weed, less pest or less herbicide, etc. But if you put grazing in and you pay yourself to graze it, your cattle might not necessarily make money, but your rent on what you're doing or your lease for putting the cattle on there will go back into your farm enterprise budget and help you show more of a positive return on your investment. So what kind of results and gains do we see? This is it's getting to be a little bit dated now, about 6 years, but our cattle on this study, they grazed about 90 days on a cover crop blend. This was a winter cover crop. And we compared it to just some other calves we had on fescue. We only got about a 2-pound average daily gain on our cover crop blend. And as Mr. Spear had said earlier, gains are very, very variable on these cover crops. On this one, you know, I imagine that my numbers would have been a lot better, but we had a snowstorm, like 2-foot snowstorm, 2 weeks before we were supposed to pull the cattle out of the field. You know, those cattle did not gain anything during that time frame. So, but that's real life. So what do we kind of know about using these covers as an annual forage? There's a list, a huge list of potential cover crops you can use or annual forages, and it's kind of daunting. And so, like I said, for this purpose of this talk, I'm only talking about the above ground part that can go into the cattle and what you want to use for that. So one of the first things that I looked at, you know, like I said, there's 50 different cover crop options. So what do we actually need to plant from the cattle side? We know if you go out and look in any native range, our perennial systems, diversity is the best. In some studies where they had Bermuda as their base pasture, if they added wheat or rye, crimson clover, wheat clover, etc., they had a lot heavier calf weaning weight. The cows really didn't have any significant gain differences, but it's kind of hard to measure cow gain differences sometimes. In any of our fescue, anytime you add a legume or anything else into fescue, you constantly see cattle gains improved. Now, what I thought was really interesting is if you already had a diverse perennial pasture, if you added in other annual plant species, you did not improve your cattle gains. So if it was already diverse to begin with, it didn't help. So I was like, wait a minute, all this is off of perennials and I'm looking at annuals. What does the literature show us? There's actually very few head-to-head comparisons of cattle gain between a grass-only annual forage and one in a mixture. Now, granted, you know, these are all still just, or this Florida study that I just presented, that is triticale and ryegrass, so it's a grass in a grass, but they saw that adding the triticale did not improve cattle gains. In oat rye mixtures or rye oat ryegrass, about similar gains. And I need to delete that because now I have 3 years of data that disproves that statement. I did want to jump on further about, what Mr. Spear was saying about the question about the legumes. We in Kansas, especially for our fall legumes, just have a heck of a time trying to get them established. And from a cattle gain perspective, those fall annual forages, your wheat, rye, oats, barley, triticale, any of your brassicas offer way more protein, way more nitrogen than the cattle actually need, even to get that 3.5, 4 pound average daily gains if they physically could do that. So from the legume perspective, we don't really need those in our winter mixes. And just like he said, and I have this some brand new data that's still hasn't been fully sussed out. Our legumes in our winter, I don't necessarily really need it, but my legumes in my summer annual forages, especially for my cattle, they do have some positive benefits for increasing crude protein. We actually were seeing a little bit of a symbiotic boost in some of our sorghum production with sun hemp in there or cowpea. But for the winter ones, I still haven't figured out how to economically justify that high seed cost. Now, the other thing, we're like, okay, what grows? What do cattle need? The other question is, what are cattle going to eat? That was one thing I've looked into. And you can kind of make cows eat most anything. But for your stalker calves where daily gain, you don't want them to hit any roadblocks, that becomes really a good question. So I did several different studies, and I used kind of my pet Holsteins just because that's all the cattle I had at the time. And I grew these different cover crops in these blue repurposed protein tubs. And these ones here, I had 8 different fall winter covers. This was the list, and I offered it to the cattle pre-freeze. And I was just interested to see what they actually would eat. And most of it were all the different brassicas, because mainly I'd found zero information about cattle palatability on the different brassicas. So if you look at it, the way this is set up, the lower number means it's more preferentially selected. And so from left to right is what they liked the best to the least. And we kind of had a really distinct separation in cattle palatability or preference. The barley, they loved it. The grass, they really, really went after, followed by our winter pea and the forage radish, or that graze of forage radish. Now, the interesting thing about that winter pea, those cows, we sat there and watched them for a first hour that they were exposed to it, and then I recorded them for 24 hours and actually watched what they did off of my video camera. And those winter peas, they would come up, sniff them, look at them, go and look at everything else, come and take a bite or two of that forage radish, come back and look at those peas, and take another couple bites of that forage radish. And then when they finally took a bite of that winter pea, then they just ate them all. So it was kind of, and these cattle had never been exposed to something like this. So they really had to learn how to eat that. And I spent a little bit of time wondering, why was that forage radish so much more preferentially selected above all those other brassicas? Well, that forage radish is actually designed to be lower glucosinolate, and the glucosinolate is what causes your spiciness in your horseradish. And it's very bitter for cattle. Cattle have 3 taste buds: salty, sweet, and bitter. They're adverse to bitter, like sweet. Salty, they like to a degree, and then becomes adverse after that. Well, when we actually measured glucosinolate concentrations on that forage radish, it was like 1/3 the amount of glucosinolates as the others. So our cattle actually preferred it much more than the others. They did not like kale, and I don't blame them. I ate raw kale for the first time myself, same time those cows were, and I'm never going to eat raw kale again. Now, I wondered post-freeze if we would see something different, because we do find that after a freeze, especially with those brassicas, that glucosinolate level goes down, and the sweetness that are naturally in those brassicas becomes more predominant. The cattle taste it to a higher degree. So I wondered what would happen after the freeze. And I threw in another couple of grass species and common vetch. That was one of the legumes that I'm starting to look into as a possible option over the winter to see if it grows and what is our cattle palatability, especially since it has no toxicities to cattle. Once again, left to right, the most favorite to the least favorite. And we kind of had the most favorite, once again, our grasses. Our intermediates were our legume and that forage radish again, and my trophy rape and my turnip, that purple top turnip that everybody plants. My cattle just did not like either of those. And so I did one quick study with the summer annuals, and you're talking about those blends, and there's lots of different kinds of blends on your summer annuals. But I'd once again found that the grasses were the most preferred, followed by our sunflower and sun hemp. And then most of those broadleaves, my cattle just really did not like them. Now, the other really interesting thing I found out about this from a grazing perspective, the BMR sorghum sedan and our BMR sorghum, forage sorghum, and our sorghum sedan, the cattle really liked them both about the same. But my pearl millet, from a grazing perspective, they were a little more adverse to. And I thought, well, maybe that's because traditionally pearl millet has higher nitrate. Nitrate's, once again, a very bitter flavor. My nitrate values were not any higher in my pearl millet than the others. So then I actually went and felt the leaves, and those pearl millet leaves are kind of prickly, kind of have that extra hair. So I wonder if it's actually more of a texture component that the cattle don't like when you're grazing it. But when you put it up for hay, most of those leaves kind of fall off. Teff is another forage that I've really been interested in, and it seems to be a great option from a haying perspective. And we're starting to get enough data that if you hay it after about 40 days after planting, you can then graze it and be able to graze it pretty heavily and get some decent gains. I think it's an under-evaluated annual forage option. And I know that I have utilized about close to my 20 minutes. I'm at a good stopping point if anybody has any questions. I haven't seen any pop up in the chat. Or Marsha or Ryan, you want me to talk for another 5 minutes, or?
Jamie Lynn, this is Ron. I'd say go ahead and talk for another 5 minutes.
That's what I was going to say as well. You're good.
Okay. So then the next question kind of comes to my mind when I think about my annual forages and cattle is, how do we use them? What type of livestock needs to go on there? You know, and there's several different things. Are gains your priority? Is maximizing your land, getting the most economic value off of it? What class of animal maximizes your acreage? Now, typically, especially on our winter annuals, if you have a dry pregnant cow, one who's not lactating, we are offering way more energy and protein than that cow needs. It actually ends up being kind of an inefficiency in your system, because if you put too much fat on your cow, you could have been putting more calves or more cows and limit feeding how much of that cover they're getting. And overall, you end up making more money. Now, you might be sitting there going, you know, I told you in words what that was. Here's for those of you who are more visual learners. I have in the yellow line this is a spring cow's energy requirements. This is a 1,400-pound cow producing 30 pounds of milk on average, and she calves in March. You can see she kind of has a peak lactation occurring in April and May. When you wean a calf in that September-October timeframe, that's when they have her lowest energy demands, and then it comes back up. And then you have your fall cow, same curve, same cow, but you start calving in August, September time, or sorry, you calve in September and you wean in about April or May. So you can see daily energy requirements are in that yellow and green, but up in this upper corner, those are all of the energy values that come off of these different winter annual forages. When energy consumed is higher than energy required, what happens? You end up putting on weight. So if you need to put weight on your cows, that works out great. However, I think there's some other ways that you can more economically or be able to maximize more use out of your land. So one of them is limit grazing or short-term grazing of your high-quality forage, or what I coin a combination paddock. So for, remember this is for your cow-calf guys. I'll talk about stockers in just a little bit. But for your cow-calf guys on that limit grazing or short-term grazing, Oklahoma State's actually done more research on this than others. They turned out cows 3 times a week for 4 hours each of those times. And then the rest of the time, the cows were just out on dormant native range or junk hay or whatnot. And so what that was is that 3 times a week, that gave those cows the protein boost or protein requirements they needed to be able to utilize that dry dormant forage quality. Now, interestingly enough, when I first heard that, I thought, I'm never going to get my cows off of that wheat. They're just going to camp out there forever. So I talked to the student who took care of the cattle, not the researcher, because sometimes us researchers aren't out there every day taking care of the animals. And they said after that first week, those cattle eventually learned to go out, graze. They got their belly full, like Thanksgiving dinner, and they wanted to go back and loaf in a low quality area. So they were able to, all those cattle ended up going back to the pen outside of, that one cow. And there's always just one cow that needs to go to the sale barn because they're a pain. But in their fall calving herd, they actually had the cattle gain weight and their calves weaned off quite a bit heavier in that system. Now the combination paddock, I actually coined this, I should give the credit to my father-in-law because he's the one who kind of started doing it, and then I decided to do the research on it. But he would have milo or corn stalks right next to his cover crop or wheat, and he'd fence off both and allow the cows to go back and forth between the wheat and the corn stalks. And our cows were just in the perfect condition all the time. So I started doing the math, and it turns out that you need about 1 acre of your cover crop blend to about 2 to 3 acres of your corn stalks if you have about 130 bushel corn. And that'll run a cow 90 days. And when you do that, we actually can see, and there's actually the numbers for your spring herd and then your fall herd. How many acres of your cocktail or annual forage, and how much of your stocks. But, and I did not put the picture in, I'm sorry. But I actually put GPS collars on my cows because I thought, once again, they're probably eating all the wheat and then they're just cleaning up the stalks later. And I find that those cows spend about half their time eating in both of those. They kind of balance out their meals to be able to optimally keep their condition. So if you don't want to do a lot of rotational grazing or move your cows or do some strip grazing, that's what some of the folks in Nebraska will do. They calculate how many acres a cow needs to actually meet her energy requirements that day, and then just move the fence for X amount of acres. Now on our weaned calves, once again, speaker right before, we didn't mean to talk or, say the same things, but our variability there on winter covers, especially for stalkers, is very wide. On 10 different studies out of Nebraska, they had gains anywhere between 0.8 of a pound up to 2.3 pounds a day. And in some of those cocktails or mixtures that they had planned in back-to-back years, one year they had a 2.3 pound average daily gain. The very next year they only had a 1.3. So for those of you wanting some more gain numbers, these are mostly just different grasses that I've found from around the country, different gains. And you can see even within the same grass species, we can have very variable gains. One thing that I've been kind of seeing, you'll see I kind of have a love-hate relationship with the brassicas for our stalkers. Because out of Minnesota, they had several of these different blends. And you can kind of see with your performance average daily gain, the next to last column, that as you incorporate more of the brassicas, more of the turnips in the blend, the lower your calf gain is. And part of that is just that preference component. I've seen calves almost starve to death before they will start eating some of those brassicas. They will just clean up all that grasses before they go and touch the other brassicas.
Hey, Jamie Lynn, I got a question for you.
Yes, Ryan?
I'll do one quick question and we'll probably move on to our panel. But for guys in Harvey County, grazing stalkers or cow-calf, whatever, but summertime, if you had to pick 3 different varieties of covers, what would you plant, and then what would you plant in the winter time for maximum gains for our area?
So for the winter stalkers, I will answer that one first because I have more data and more things I've looked at. I kind of like either an oat or a barley and a rye with a max of 2 pounds of a turnip or a radish. And as I've seen more and more about how my cattle perform and preference and everything, I know they're way more expensive, but those forage radish varieties just seem to have less negative palatability, and the cattle seem to do a little better on them. And I don't like going more than 2 pounds just because every time I've planted more than 2 pounds of it, I've had 60 to 70% turnips growing and less grass. And so my cattle gains just have not been as good. In regards to my summer blends, I just analyzed some data today, and one of the best blends that I had, and this was this year, in regards to biomass quality, its ability to either be a hay, a silage, or as a grazer, a BMR forage sorghum, or a sorghum sedan, with a little bit of sun hemp. That seemed to be what I thought was my best mix. And on this, we actually saw, like I said, that sun hemp did something enough to boost even our sorghum sedan growth. Now, the sun hemp, as when we cut it for the hay portion, it had matured just a bit too much, in my opinion. It was pretty stocky, pretty stemmy. But if you could kind of keep up with the sun hemp, you have a pretty good forage with that. My pearl millet probably did half the performance of that BMR sorghum sedan.
Thank you. I think we'll probably start with the panel now. Ron's going to kind of run that for us. So I'll let him take off with that. So take it away, Ron.
Okay, thanks, Ryan. Ron Graber, work as a watershed specialist for K-State in the Harvey, McPherson, well, a little bigger area in that. And Marcia and Ryan had asked me to kind of lead the panel discussion, and so I will go ahead and do that. Appreciate everybody's participation. I know we've been on a good hour now. So we've got a couple of things I want to address with you, and then I think we can stay on as long as anybody has questions within reason. But I wanted to start out a little bit initially and address the cost of cover crops and how we can get a little bit of assistance through some incentives to do that. And there are several options. So we'll start out with NRCS and let them just briefly kind of mention what might be available through EQIP and through some of those programs. So Jared, I don't know, are you going to do that, or who's?
Yep, sure can. Or Zamaris, did you want to start?
Yeah, either one or both of you.
Do you guys can see our screen or my screen?
Yep.
Zumaris is got video, but she's working through her phone, and she is the new district conservationist in the Newton office.
So can you guys see my screen? There, our presentation.
No.
No, we cannot.
Okay, here. There you go. Now.
Yes.
Now we can see it.
Sorry about that. So my name is Samaris. I'm the new district conservationist for NRCS in the Newton field office, Harvey County. And so Jared is going to help me out today. He's our resource conservationist from Hutchinson. Basically, what I just wanted to talk to you guys about today was how to apply for an NRCS financial assistance program. And we do that through the EQIP program, Environmental Quality Incentive Program. And the first thing you need to do, is just contact the closest one, which will be Newton here for us in Harvey County, and update records with Farm Service Agency there with the girls. If you are the owner, they will need proof of ownership, so they will need your deed. You don't have to be the owner to apply for an NRCS EQIP, but if you are, they will need to put you as the operator or another tenant. And so there's some lease agreements we will need to have, or papers that the landlord will need to give you permissions in order for us to work with you. Also, there's certain other paperwork that you will need to fill out with Farm Service Agency there that are required for eligibility purposes. And then when you have that done, then you will come and see me or Mr. Mark Religa, which is our technician there at the office. I will take the application. We'll help you out filling out the application there. If if there's any questions on that, we'll help you out there at the office. Like everyone else said, the intent of the cover crop is to benefit the reduce in the erosion part. Is to increase soil organic matter, to increase biodiversity there, to have less weeds and conserve the soil moisture you have in the soil. Same like the soil compaction. In Kansas, here we have NRCS has two ways on to how to financially assist with cover crops, and the two of them are cover crops, basic, organic, not organic, and the other one is the multiple species. And then I'll have Jared to tell you a little bit more about them.
Okay, thanks and good evening, everybody. I'm Jared Kneisel, Area Resource Conservationist for NRCS. I cover the southwest fourth of the state, thereabouts. part of the soil health team for what we call Area 2. And then on the program side of things, I have lead programmatic responsibilities for the EQIP program, which Samaris did a good job touching base on there a bit. So she put together some of this information showing what some different cover crop incentive scenarios would be. Thankfully, this year in 2020, we kept it pretty simple. We just had two different components. One would be a reimbursement if you were just looking for that single species seeding. And so we would do a basic cover crop component then there. So how that would work, you'd work with your local conservationist to fill out that application, to discuss the resource concerns that you have on your operation, what you're comfortable trying, whether it's a single field or you want to apply it across your whole operation. There would be an inventory done. They'd assess the resources on your operation, and then just come up with a plan. Hey, based on what we saw and in our conversation with you, we see that you have opportunity to fit in a cover crop 3 or 4 or 5 times perhaps in your cropping rotation, and then we'd rank that application out, and if funded, the cost share would come accordingly. So on this basic scenario, again using the 2020 scenario, we'd pay $36.33. It's kind of a flat rate for every acre that was seeded to cover crop for soil health purposes. Smarts, I think you had figures on for our other scenario as well, the multiple species, if you want to advance the slide for me. So if we step up the diversity and you want to address maybe multiple resource goals, I think we find more often than not that folks are wanting to try those multi-species cocktail mixes, and of course with that there's usually increased costs, and so our component costs are higher accordingly. So for this year in 2020, any EQIP contract we would write, basically the payout there would be $43.33 per acre seeded. And again, depending on how that conservation plan is written, that could be applied once, twice, up to maybe 5 instances of that. So, what do you have on the next slide there, Samaris? Again, just kind of some more definitions there, and a few limitations as well. So when we're looking at applying federal cost share assistance on there, it's to help pay to address a conservation need, and so we want to protect that cover is going to sustain long enough to do the job that we expect it to, whether it's keeping ground cover to retain that cover and combat evaporation losses, or whether it's to fight compaction. So there are going to be some limitations. You can see there on the right hand side of the screen. If we wrote that contract, for instance, for soil degradation due to organic matter depletion, we're wanting to maximize the amount of carbon that's left out there in that growing cover, and so haying would not be an allowed use. Again, this is if we're cost sharing on it. If we're just working with you to develop a conservation plan, you're available to do that if you wish. But if we're helping pay for that seed, then there's some limitations that go along with it. Likewise for grazing. Grazing is a fantastic use and benefit, and it also helps promote soil health. Jamie Lynn did a fantastic job there. I know Ryan's been a strong proponent of grazing covers, but we need to make sure that grazing, again, if we're involved from a cost share standpoint, that grazing is going to be carried out responsibly. And so we'll help you get a grazing plan developed, just to make sure that when you do run those critters across and it's time to pull them out, that there's still enough cover crop left out there that it's going to do the job that it was set out to do in the first place. That's what that was about. And again, there on the left-hand side, I kind of touched on that. Just kind of depending on your operation, the windows of opportunity you have to seed any cover crops, we could be looking at a contract with maybe 2 or 3 instances of paying for covers, but we could go up to 5 there. And again, that's under EQIP as we've known it to this point. It's always subject to change from one year to the next. Up to now, that's what we know. And the biggest thing is just make contact with your local field office and tell them you're interested in seeing what the cover crops do for your operation, and they'll work with you on a conservation plan, and they'll find that conservation program that's the best fit. Marcia had discussed about the state cost share cover crop incentive, which that's something new for Harvey County at least. So Marcia, I didn't know, were you planning on visiting about that?
No, I was,
Okay,
if they want any more details, they can call the office.
good.
I figured that'd be the easiest way. And it varies by county. Not
Yep.
all counties are doing it, but Harvey County is.
So I think the big thing is just if you're interested, just go visit with somebody and let them know your interest. At least on the federal program side of things, that's the biggest thing is just making your request known. That way we can sign an application and that field office can hang on to it for whenever the next funding cutoff is going to be. Typically, our scenario is we accept applications year round. We batch them in mid-November. We plan and we rank all winter long, and then that following spring, we'd have a pretty good idea if you get funded or not.
Jared, so just to elaborate, if somebody's interested in applying for EQIP assistance on cover crops, and what I'm hearing you're saying, probably not an option for this winter, or is it?
Yeah, doubtful, Ron. We don't know for sure when that cutoff is going to be, but the pattern has been sometime mid-November, we're going to stop taking applications for that ranking period. And then throughout the rest of that winter, we're going to be putting the plans together, making field visits, doing the ranking and all that. It all takes time. And quite honestly, we haven't been obligating contracts until late spring the following year. So you might sign up November 1st, and you might not find out if you're going to be approved until that following April or May, unfortunately. Now, there is some options we can do. Not to get too in the weeds, but we can do what's called an early start waiver. And that's basically you getting permission to, hey, I know that I'm not funded yet, but I really want to get something in the ground. We can do that. It puts you at risk a little bit because if you don't rank high enough to get funded, then we can't reimburse you. But if you're going to go ahead and do it anyways, you might as well request that early start waiver. And then if you do get funded, we can reimburse you after the fact.
So if we want to go in and plant rye into that, after being harvested or something,
Yeah.
we might still be able to do that. That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Did you guys have any more? Or was that the?
Well, okay, so that was EQIP. Marcia touched on state cost share a bit. We also have CSP, the Conservation Stewardship Program. That's kind of a horse of a different color, but nonetheless, that's an incentive program. It's 5 years. You put in your whole entire operation. EQIP, we approach that from the standpoint of you come to us and you say that there's something wrong. There's some problem out there that you'd like help fixing. CSP is a little different angle that we just take a look at your whole operation and we reward you for the stewardship that you have been doing. And then what CSP does is it gives you a whole list of enhancements. Cover crops are a lot of those enhancements, and you can pick and choose to take your stewardship to the next level higher. And so that would be a whole lot longer presentation, and there's a lot more scenarios than just the two different types of covers. But CSP would be another one that's very common in our area that we get a lot of producers participating and try and cover crops. Yep. So those two are the two major ones, Ron.
Okay, great. Thank you. Appreciate the information.
Jared, did you see that there's a question on there? Does grazing void the cost share?
Grazing within reason. Now, the caveat is on there. I'm trying to find the chat window. Very good, very good. So no, it doesn't, but there's always a caveat, and we do have some of our CSP enhancements where it flat out says grazing is not allowed, but by and large, responsible grazing is okay. We just ask that you make that known up front, and we'll work with you to do an inventory. Let's see what kind of production's out there. Get our range conservationists involved. They can develop a grazing plan, but I can't blanket say that because, like I said, there's some CSP enhancements that don't allow grazing of covers. Most do. It's just within reason, and like I said, the primary goal of that cover, whatever it was put out there to do, needs to be retained. So we can't take all the goodie off of it and put it in the cow.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I assume you'll hang with us for a few more minutes if there's
sure.
another question that comes in.
Yeah. You bet.
I did want to share just a little bit, another source of incentives for planting cover crops. And as many of you know, I coordinate the Little Ark RAPS group that occupies or covers quite a bit of Harvey County, and then of course McPherson and a little bit in some other counties as well. We do have some monies available through the RAPS program to help incentivize for cover crops as well. We're a little more limited in that we have to be in the Turkey Creek watershed drainage area, so we can't go anywhere but within the Little Ark, or for that matter within Harvey County. But those funds are available. So maybe if if the EQIP or the state cost share through the conservation doesn't work for you, we do have a little bit more flexibility, especially on application dates and how far ahead and that sort of thing. So be sure and get a hold of me if that's of interest to you. The other thing that I want to mention is something that we're pretty excited about. We have a piece of equipment that's called a Hagee Montag seeder, and there's a number of these in the state. KDHE has made it possible. Well, they've actually have purchased I think 8 of these machines and are locating them around in different parts of the state. We have one in this part of the state that's at Central Prairie Co-op, and so they have signed a 3-year lease on that machine, and it is available to seed cover crops. The really neat thing about this machine is that you can go into a standing corn crop, and it's got the drop hoses. It's an air seeder that actually drops that seed in. I know some people will fly on seed with airplanes. This machine will allow you to drop that seed below the canopy, right, and get a pretty good seed to soil contact. And so it is available. They've just taken delivery on that within the last week and had a little bit of training, and so they are ready to start taking orders from guys to utilize the machine. I believe they're charging $8 an acre to seed for you. So if you're interested, and call them, that's if you buy the seed from them. If you bring your own seed in, or the cost is a little bit higher, but it's $8 an acre if you have them come in and seed that for you. So there is going to be a little bit of cost share available. Again, if you're in the Little Ark watershed, we do have some funds dedicated to help with the application costs. So depending on whether where you're located within the Little Ark will dictate how much that is. But so again, if that's something that might be of interest to you, I'd encourage you to again contact me as well, and then we basically we need to get on the schedule with Central Prairie Co-op, and then if your acres lie within the Little Ark, then we can get you a little help on paying for the seeding cost. I see it being something that will be really cool for those of you that are wanting to graze livestock, because you can get in sooner, get that cover crop in, get it up and growing quicker, so that you narrow that gap between corn harvest and when you turn the cows in. I mentioned corn. We've got some guys with grain sorghum that also want to run it. I don't know of anybody with beans, although they say you can run it in beans, but I know there's guys that have grain sorghum out there looking to graze milo stalks that want to use it as well. And I think, again, whatever seed mix, that's up to you. But, I know I've been hearing the rye talked about quite a bit as what guys are wanting to use. So just wanted to put that out there as well, so that make you aware of that. We've just started kind of promoting that in the last week or 10 days. So it's came about a little bit late, but again, it will be Central Prairie Co-op will have that machine for 3 years. So it'll be this season and then 2 more seasons. Jared, I might just ask you, is that, you know, I know you guys, if people apply for funds through you, you normally talk about seeding. Is this machine an option if they do have cost share through you?
Yeah, sure is. We've got interseeding built into our 340 or our cover crop standard right now in Kansas, especially for where we're talking here. Due to the termination guide, NRCS cover crop termination guidelines, there might be some limitations the further west you go in the state, but for here, no problem.
Okay, good. Yeah, and so again, if anybody's interested, I encourage you to go ahead and kind of get on the list. I know they the machine will be running in Cheney Lake area, Little Ark area, and then there may be some areas outside of that as well. And I know within the Little Ark, we know about 600 or 800 acres already of guys that are wanting to run on their fields, and so I'd encourage you to kind of get on the list. One of the questions that came in over chat: any thoughts on drilling versus broadcast covers? Ryan Spear, that might be for you.
Yeah, I have not done the broadcast a whole lot. We've flown on some small seeded stuff with limited success into irrigated corn. The drill always seems to be better. I'm intrigued by this new rig, and I haven't got them called yet, but it sounds like I probably need to. We're probably at least going to do a circle or two and see, just compare it to where, especially where we're going to graze, if we can get some more growth out of it and see. I'll have to think through about, probably need smaller seeded seeds to make that work. But I definitely want to at least have them run a circle so we have a comparison. But yeah, we've done some aerial stuff with very limited consistency. I'd say that. I wouldn't say it wasn't successful. It just limited consistency.
And we've had some studies in Southwest Kansas on this as we were looking to update our standards and specs, and drilling was a far superior way of going about it. But if that's the only window opportunity you had, it was okay enough. Hard telling, whether it was more sunlight competition versus getting caught up in the leaves of the plants. So being under a pivot would sure help wash that seed down and get that seed to soil contact. So some limited success. I know on our property up in very northeast Kansas, we've flown on some covers a few times and didn't have a whole lot of success, except for maybe on tops of the terraces where we had open exposure to the sky. But there's an option, just a more inferior option maybe.
Okay. Jamie
in
Lynn,
Southeast, where we kind of have a lot more tillage than in your neck of the woods, the broadcasting works pretty decent. But we don't have any of that competition you guys are talking about. And actually, I prefer my brassicas to be broadcasted. That's when I have my best stands, because we have a tendency to get them in too deep. They're super shallow. But that's it. I did see from Brett I know Ron's going to ask what the question was, any idea to estimate stocking rates on both winter and summer covers? On our winter covers, we do have a few little rules of thumb. For your grass varieties, oat, barley, wheat, rye, etc., for each inch of height, you get about 150 pounds of dry matter per acre. So on a 9-inch or 6-inch rye, it's a 9-inch rye, 500-pound calf, you get about 35 days of grazing when you take half, leave half, trampling, etc. On your summer covers, once again, some of our rules of thumb, some numbers we have is with your sorghum sedans, doing rotational grazing, which we strongly recommend so you don't kill your cattle due to prussic acid. You only graze it about 10 days most. And you can put about 5 to 6 animal units per acre. So that's essentially 5,000 to 6,000 pounds of beef per acre for 10 days. and then you rotate to your next one. On your pearl millet, it's 4 to 5 animal units per acre. So that's 4,000 to 5,000 pounds of beef for 10 days, and then you move to the next section. In regards to the brassica quantity and biomass and stuff, we don't have any rules of thumbs on them as of yet. And on our legumes, because every legume is just so different, I haven't yet figured out some good numbers for those.
Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions. Ryan, I do have a question for you. You talked about using covers on irrigated and dry land, and I know you've got one of the water tech farms, and so through part of that, you're also looking at water use. I guess I'd be interested in your thoughts, cover crops effects on total irrigation water use.
Yeah, we've done quite a bit of work with that, but yeah, we're definitely reducing our irrigation significantly. You know, every year is different on your water usage. You know, last year, most of our circles were 50 acre feet or less. This year, we'll probably be in that 80 to 100 acre feet range. Most of our permits are 160 to 180. So, you know, if you go back to the 2000s, that we were most of the time using most of our water. So, you know, we're pretty easily, reasonably using 40% less water than we were 15 years ago. Just to, you know, I've got some study stuff on each individual pivot and what we've done, but yeah, just a general number, it's 35-40% reduction is pretty typical.
And you would attribute that all to the cover crops? I guess what I'm getting at is
no,
the no-till is obviously a benefit as well. So
yeah, you've got nozzle technology. You've got the hybrids are much better, more water efficient, and the cover. So you're throwing a lot of things together that's giving you those big numbers.
okay. Well, and the reason I ask that is, you know, one of the things that we hear a lot when we recommend cover crops is, well, it's an expense. How do I get that back? You know, and certainly utilizing cattle is one way to get it back, but, you know, especially in a situation like yours where you're irrigating, if you can, you know, cut your water use, then, you know, not only you're not using as much water, but you're not using the power to run the pump too. So
Yep.
okay, I'm not seeing any more questions come in. Ryan and Marcia, I think maybe we might be about wrapped up here. We probably kept everybody on just about to their bedtime.
We kept them on a little bit long, and I don't know about your house, but my daughter made brownies while we were sitting here, so I'm ready to go.
How come we're not at your house?
I don't know. But thank you, all of our speakers, and thank you, Ryan Fleming, for hosting this seminar. And we hope that you all gained some valuable insight out of it. And thank you very much for coming. And Ryan, do you have anything to add?
We'll probably be doing more of these this winter. So if you guys have any ideas how you would like to change it, let me know. I'm all ears. I'm not seeing how we're gonna be able to change how we can do these meetings for now. So I hope you guys enjoy Zoom meetings in the foreseeable future, because that's probably what's going to be happening. So.
And you will have this posted up on the extension website, correct?
Yes. Yep, it will be on our website.
Someone...
So if you guys can share it from there, or if anyone wants it on their website, we'll send it to you, and you guys can post it too. So.
Yeah, I don't think we warned them, but you've been recording all of the sessions, yep. So yeah.
We got you.
All right. Thank you all for coming.
Everyone have a good night.
Thank you.